so excited to be here. When I saw the types of speakers that are here and the audience, I thought, this is the center of what we're talking about as a customer service. And when I came in earlier and I was listening to some of the panelists, and they were talking about the people side of it and how the UX folks got to talk to the CX folks and about the business, I thought, this is perfect, because what I'm going to share with you is behind the scenes. How does a customer service company run right from the very beginning, and how it's embedded over the course of time on both the art side, the people side, and the science side. So why am I so passionate about it? I did spend 4 years running our customer service and analytics team, so completely deconstructed the science behind why customers like JetBlue. And then I moved over to the talent side. So I was head of talent for JetBlue. So for 4 years, did a bunch of the hiring. We covered, in the span of 4 years, we hired, I want to say about 8,000 of our 18,000 crew members through our processes. There are actually more PhDs on the talent team at JetBlue than all of the rest of the airline combined. So that will give you a little bit of a hint behind the combination of art and science. But before I get too deep into it, I do want to share a little bit about JetBlue, because I realize I'm in Virgin American territory. But hey, Virgin America just moved in with Alaska. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. So I'm going to give a little bit of a, because it became with the absolute core to the beginning. These are the founders of JetBlue 16 years ago. And now this is the year 2000. What was air travel like in the year 2000? Was those lines, smiling? Nah. Customer service and airlines you would not put in the same sentence, and you certainly wouldn't put humanity and air travel in the same sentence. So this was a huge vision to bring humanity back to travel. And it was a small start. Yes, we started from Buffalo to New York. But where we are now, we're now 96 cities and growing. We hope in the next month or so, we're going to announce 4 new cities in Cuba. So that'll bring us to 100. So giving us a sense of the breadth, we're actually expanding out on the West Coast, so you're going to see more of us here. But the key here is when you start with a tiny little airline 16 years ago, when we launched, we had about 200 crew members at the company. We now have close to 20,000. How do you scale customer service? How do you scale culture? Because in the end of the day, culture and customer service are almost one and the same. So I would be remiss if I didn't also mention product. We do have a great product, but I'm actually going to mention it in the context of our culture. Because in the end of the day, the product and how the crew members, we call all of our employees crew members, care about the product and how proud they are makes a difference in how they deliver the customer service. Now, it all leads up to this. Now, we have a ton of these awards, all different kinds of awards, but the reason we are proud of these awards is not for the reason that you would think. So some people tout out their J.D. Power Awards. We've won 12. We just won our last one for this year, I should say. We'll have 13 coming up. So we had 12. It was just announced last week. But we don't tout the awards for the reasons that you think. How many of you would actually buy a plane ticket because an airline won a J.D. Power Award? Nobody, right? So it really doesn't matter out in the community sense of why a company, whether you win a J.D. Power Award or Best Customer Service Award or any kind of award. In the end of the day, that's not why the customers are buying your service. The reason we care about the J.D. Power Award is because our crew members care. And pride is one of the biggest drivers of a culture. So we care about it for our crew members' side. So if we think about this crew member, she's a flight attendant. We call it in-flight crew member. Obviously, it's a staged picture, but I want to kind of deconstruct this a little bit before I get into the science part. Okay, she's smiling. Now, one of these things is if she's smiling, the customer's going to smile. It's an automatic human emotional reaction. When one person smiles, the other person smiles back. And then it becomes this continual feedback loop. Now, why would she be smiling? Well, okay, she's very proud of the fact that we got a great product. Live TV, broadband Wi-Fi, completely free, no charging. And she has also received feedback from the customers directly. It's amazingly powerful when the crew member hears from the customer directly, not from their boss. And so now we'll get into the piece of the science and the art. I'd like to cue up in fact, I'm going to go back. I'd like to cue up a video that I pulled from YouTube a little while ago. It's actually a commercial from 15 years ago. And when we think about culture, if the founders, I don't know how many CEOs we have in the audience, this part is really important. One of the definitions I would say of culture is whatever you set out to do when you start your company, if you 15 years later can say that it's the same, the culture is the same. So this is a video that was done 15 years ago. It's commercial. It's going to run for just 1 minute. And I want you to get a sense of it. And then I'm going to ask if anybody's flown JetBlue recently and if it seems to resonate. You can cue the video. Maybe it'll cue up.
Leather seat.
No. Oh, he's going to rewind. I think it needs. That was the end of it, so I just need to rewind it for just 1 second. Yep.
Why are you calling me? Why? Sorry, that was pretty rude of me.
I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me.
Hey, buddy, you jumped the spot of cash.
Hey, thanks, pal.
What you do to me.
I'm sorry. Please, after you, I insist. No, I couldn't do it.
Everything's alright. I'm hooked on a feeling. I'm believing that you're in love with
Is it always like this around here?
Just when the JetBlue flights come in.
lips as sweet as candy.
With new planes, DirecTV service at
All
every
right.
big leather seat.
So has anybody flown JetBlue recently? What was your experience like? Ah, it was fantastic. The blue chips and the television. How about the in-flight crew? Did you see anything different with them at all? Okay, so who else? Anyone else? Yes. What was different?
The onboarding experience is a little bit different. It's my first American.
Oh, okay, okay.
It seemed, and the onboarding was actually.
Oh, getting onto the airplane. Okay. So anyway, has anybody had any different interactions with the in-flight crew than you would perhaps on a different airline? So I'll tell you how it all works on the art and the science of it. So this is a crew. This one happens to be in Boston. It's one of our top performing stations. What's interesting about this group is you have mechanics on the left, flight attendants on the right, the ground crew in the middle, and the supervisor is kind of the woman that's up on here. They operate as a strong team and a strong unit. Without this teamwork, it wouldn't work. So how do we create it? What are the elements behind it? The art part of this is 4 things. Crew member engagement. Now, it depends on different companies and different styles, but I would argue that these 4 elements, I'll go into each one of them, make a huge difference in engagement. So what is an engaged call center rep, wherever you are at? What is an engaged retail representative? How do you measure it? How do you know? So when we think of trust, the first 2 are the environment that we create, the trust and the pride, and the second 2 are the people that we have. So on the environment part, the trust. This, if you trust your boss and you trust the direction the company is going, you are much more likely to be engaged. So how in an 18,000 person company can a crew member trust the CEO or any of the senior leaders of the company? One of the things, and this is where that HR part is just so incredibly important, and I heard this earlier on some of the panels, about how when somebody is hired, they spend time at the call center and they listen to customers. Several things are required for all leaders at the company. First of all, everybody gets hired, and it doesn't matter whether you're a call center agent or you're a senior officer of the company. You start in the same orientation on the same day. We run them every 2 weeks. And the CEO comes down, and the senior officers come down and teach JetBlue culture for a full day. Then the leaders are required, it's part of actually 20% of what my goals are, is to be out with our crew members. Even though I'm now in a separate subsidiary, I run the venture arm for JetBlue, 20% of my annual awards is based upon me interfacing with our frontline crew members. So I go down to the orientation. I go out and fly, so yes, I am going out and flying. We require our officers to go out to our call center, and they do double jack. So they'll listen in, for those of you that run in the call center, working the double jacking of it. We each get assigned a city. So there's 96 cities. We have about 100 officers or so. And you go to the city every quarter and just hang out. My city's LaGuardia. I go out to LaGuardia, I have pizza with the crew, and they begin to build this trust. So thinking about how do you create your incentive structures for your leaders, how are you incented? How do you know that you are building trust? So it has to be gone from right through the entire fabric. And then the feedback information is given back to the leaders. What is their trust? We actually measure the trust as well. So the trust part is one of the important. Now I will get into the pride. The single most important piece for us, based upon the science that we've done that ties engagement, what is the key driver of engagement, is pride. How can you drive pride in your organizations? So for us, we do use the JD Power stuff, and we actually have when we win it, JD goes on a tour. JD travels to all 96 cities. We actually assign him to a crew member. He's got a little box, we call him JD, and he travels around, and crew members take pictures of him. It's just one way in thinking about what are some things that you can drive pride in your organization, because if you're proud, it makes you want to be part of, because you're part of something bigger. So that trust and the pride are the two factors. Now, in your organization, you might have some other elements, but those are the two that are the most important for us from the environment side of it. And now we'll get into the teamwork and the intrinsic motivation. So I would argue any customer service organization, no matter what, the customer self will interface with a lot of different departments in an organization. They'll go to the web, and that's run by the web team, and then maybe they have an issue, and they'll go to call the customer support, that's the customer support team, and then they want to get this product, and that comes from the product team or whatever it may be. So a lot of the organizations are fairly siloed, unless you are wired to be a team member, to think, when I'm flight attendant, when I arrive at the gate, I need to tell the person the gate agent who's receiving the plane, how was the flight? Or when I'm boarding the plane, and maybe it's a little bit messy, the gate agent boarding the plane will tell the flight attendant who's going to spend 5 hours with these customers, what's the mood in the gate area? And now, here's something that's really interesting, and it applies on call centers. A lot of times you have the monitors, and you can track talk time and all of that. But in the retail space, the manager or the supervisor may not be there to observe things. So it needs to be somebody who's really wired to do it just because. I call it getting up on the right side of the bed. And that's the last one here. When you're thinking, and we have done a bunch of studies behind this, of the number one thing that makes someone fit into our culture is intrinsic motivation. Now, what is that? That means that you're driven by something other than a paycheck. You're doing it just because. You are the gate agent that isn't going to get paid more to smile, or to run you through security because your flight is late, or the flight attendant to carry that crying baby that is driving everybody absolutely crazy, to pick up the baby and walk up and down the aisle and calm the baby down so that mom gets calmed down. So for us, we look at intrinsic motivation in the hiring process. When you're hiring customer service professionals, we don't care as much about the education piece. We don't care much about some of the other things, but we care about volunteerism. Because volunteerism is a way to measure whether somebody's intrinsically motivated. So thinking about, is it somebody who gets up on the right side of bed just because? So we actually put that into our selection process on how to hire people. So there's a personality profile. Depending on the companies you have, whether you can create your own personality assessments or whether you go out and use some of the tools that are out there, I highly suggest you look at this, because it's a fantastic way. Because what's fascinating too, and this is where we get into the business side, and this is sort of tying some of the business, if you fit into a culture, if you've joined an organization that you feel and you belong, and I think it was one of the gentlemen from Betterment mentioned this, guess what? You have less attrition. People want to be there to be a part of the organization because they feel right. And if they don't fit into the culture, they're going to self-eject. which causes the attrition part to rise. So this is as we're getting into the science part of it. So for us, we've talked about engaged crew members or engaged employees for you guys. And however you choose to measure it, again, we have several factors. Those are those 4 that we measure. If somebody's engaged, now it's common sense that if somebody's engaged, absolutely common sense, they're engaged, they're going to give better service. But we are a large company, and we've got to prove it to the accountants and the bean counters and all of that, right? So we have to make the business case for this. So this is where the science piece comes in. So we've proven that engaged crew members provide better service, and better service provides more loyal customers. So on that last piece, and then I'm going to dive into it a little bit, we know that a customer that provides, we use Net Promoter Score, and I'll cover that in a little bit more, but one point of Net Promoter Score increase, we've done the math to determine, because we actually looked at the NPS scores of different customers, and we know how much that's worth on a dollar sign. So it makes a big difference on the dollar sign, and it's actually exponential, because it's actually much harder to raise an NPS from a 40 to a 60, or much easier to go from a 40 to a 60 than a 60 to an 80. So here's how the science part works, and here's how we actually measured it. So a gate agent who's engaged. So we made a definition of engaged, and I told you those 4 elements that we talked about. A gate agent who's engaged has twice the number of compliments than one that's not. Compliments coming from the customer. So this is measured directly from the customer. An engaged pilot is 2 times as likely to be labeled an excellent communicator. And I'll cover what. Think about that when you hear your pilot, how much more comfortable you feel. And we'll cover a little bit of detail in a second. So an engaged pilot is twice as likely to be considered an engaged crew member. The flight attendant piece, an engaged flight attendant, 8 times more likely to get a customer service recognition from a customer. 8 times. Now, part of that makes sense, because how often do you see your pilot, right? You see the pilot if you see the pilot. Most other airlines probably won't, but if you do see the pilot for a short period of time, flight attendant, our average flights are 3 hours. But if you can think of what an impact this will make, when you have an engaged crew member is now automatically delivering the customer service. We also, on our call center, we know that engaged call center reps have a significantly higher upsell rate. They also get higher customer service scores on their after call. So how are we measuring this? So as I mentioned before, we use the Net Promoter System. And for those who aren't familiar, the Net Promoter Scale can go from 100 on the positive side to negative 100 on the negative side. And you take the promoters, so 9 and 10, the score 9 and 10 on a scale of 0 to 10. And you subtract the number of detractors, which is from 0 to 6. So if you think the airline industry for a second here. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but just kind of think, how often, depending on all the different airlines you fly, would you score an airline a 9 or a 10? And then how often might you score to 0 to 6, if you answered it at all? So you can see in the airline industry, the scores might be lower. But for us, we're pretty proud because we're at 65, which makes a significant difference. So each of those elements, though, of NPS, so we asked the one question, then we asked the different drivers. It's the customer service element, the human element, that has the biggest driver of the customer, of the NPS score. So, and one point of NPS goes to the bottom line. So now, when we build our business cases we need to have a better tool for our crew members in the call center, because if we can prove that if they have this tool in the call center, they won't have to do all the manual tasks. Sure, there's the talk time is less, but they're happier because nobody wants to do all those manual tasks. When they're happier, they're going to have a higher score. And when they have a higher score, it equals dollar signs. That builds out our business case, and we get the software. We get the flight attendant tools. We get the flight attendant training or the pilot training. So when we think of these, what is the voice of the customer? Now, I mentioned surveys, and obviously you can see here we have the surveys are mostly green because I mentioned it's the NPS score. But in the customer service world, it's incredibly important to think about all channels. how many people actually email companies these days? Not as many, but when they do, it's typically either they need clarification on something or there's a negative feedback. And by the way, what percentage of customers will actually do surveys too? Right? So while we're really proud of ourselves for the awards and while we're really proud of ourselves on the NPS score, we spend an enormous amount of time on the other two channels. And I very much encourage, and there's some amazing tools that are coming out there, right? Some natural language processing and text analytics and all those kinds of things. Because if you just use one measure and survey, you're going to completely lose a segment of your customer base. For us, we fly a lot into Latin America. And Latin Americans typically will not answer a survey if they're from that country. Now, maybe if they're Latin Americans, they will. But if they're from Colombia or Mexico or wherever it may be, they're just not going to fill out a survey. It's just not culturally something that we do. Emails, probably not either. Social's becoming to really drive. And so thinking through that omni-channel approach, and you can gather all of that feedback, but then synthesizing which way does it go, and thinking through the different channels. So we have every week we pull this stuff together. Now, when we pull this stuff together, this is what's interesting. So you can have massive amount of data, unbelievable amount of data, but data doesn't do anything. So what do we do with it? And if the charts and graphs are great, but if it doesn't actually change behavior, then it doesn't really matter. So this is where that science part comes in again. So we figure out what are the key drivers that will improve Net Promoter Score. What are the key drivers that will improve the J.D. Power Award? Because we know that the J.D. Power drives pride, and pride is the number one factor in customer engagement or crew member engagement. So we figure out what are those elements that we need to solve most, and then drive it into the department leaders' goals, which then cascades into the crew members to change behavior. The behavior piece, though, doesn't come from above. And I'm just going to say that for us, we have found that a supervisor working with call center reps or a chief pilot talking with pilots doesn't actually, just because the supervisor is incented on great customer service, and maybe even if the agent is incented on great customer service, but if you've hired the right people, they are not driven by a paycheck. Sure, they need the paycheck. That's important. But that may not incent them. What does, though, is the voice of the customer itself. So here's a picture. There's one of our most engaged pilots. His name is Eric Scott. He's been with JetBlue since almost the beginning. And Eric loves engaging with the customers. Absolutely loves it. Now, the picture here, there are two pictures, and they are 10 years apart. Yeah, he doesn't age much, believe it or not. I guess he doesn't have no gray hair, but then again, he doesn't have any hair. That's the same little boy. So this little boy, he came onto a flight. It was his first flight. He's from the Bronx in New York. And he came onto the flight, and he'd never seen a black pilot. He'd never heard about that. This is his first flight, but to see someone, and so he decided that Eric was going to be his hero. So he took this picture and he saved this picture. And he kept talking to his mom about how he wanted to be an airline pilot because Eric was an airline pilot. Time went by. Little boy's in school, he's doing okay, but not great, and he keeps saying he wants to be a pilot. So mom, 10 years later, decides to write an email, goes to the website, clicks on the little email button, and sends an email to customer service and says, my son, 10 years ago, flew with a pilot named Eric. He's a black pilot. Well, as it turns out, we only have one Eric who happens to be a black pilot, so it was easy to sort out. But that's the cool thing, is that the customer service agent who was answering the email realized how important this was. Got it into the chief pilot ranks. They tracked down Eric. Eric was so moved by this little boy that he then went and tracked down where the little boy was. And was talking to him about, he was in junior high school at the time, and the little boy said he wanted to be a pilot, and Eric said, well, I'm a mentor at the Bronx Aerospace High School. Why don't you apply? Because in New York you can apply to, so the little boy then applied and got into the Bronx Aerospace High School, and they're now mentors. The point of this story is that it started by an innocent thing that Eric loves every single day. We can measure the science behind it. He's in the top 1% of our engaged crew members, and I'm sure you have the top 1% of your engaged call center reps. How are they wired? What do they do? But then it goes beyond that. So the customer service rep who answered the email saw the significance of it and got it into the hands of the leadership. The leadership realized how incredibly important this was, got it to Eric, and then Eric, because he's so intrinsically motivated, reached out. This is what we call about the culture. And so what we did, we said, okay, it was so moving because pilots, I know I can say this because I am one, pilots, your main job, let's face it, is to fly customers. I'll fly all of you if you come on my flight safely from point A to point B. That's my job. But that's what you expect me to do. And I'm not paid anything different to do things like Eric or to get out of my seat and engage with the customers with a PA announcement. But when I do, I know, because I used to run the team and I read all these emails, that it makes a big difference. So what we decided to do is we created a training program for our pilots. We brought them all in. We bring them all in for a day. Some of them have not interfaced with senior leadership for 12, 15 years since they were hired. So the leadership spends time to build trust with these guys and gals. But what's amazing is we actually give them the feedback from their flights for the last 60 days. And when we do that, we see immediate behavior change. So here's an example. When a pilot, think about when you have when a flight goes really, really well. Okay, if you see the pilot, that's great. But if the flight is not going well, it's a long delay, or you're diverting, or you're holding and you're flying around in a circle and you're wondering what's going on. If you don't hear from the pilot, you get really nervous. You wonder what's going on. Or if it's a really rough flight. So when we showed these pilots, they had particularly the ones we call them IROPS, irregular operations. And when they diverted to a station, and the pilot says, yeah, I remember doing that. I remember that. Yep, that's my flight. And they see the power of just standing out and interfacing with the customers. And we show them their NPS scores, that when you communicate well with a customer, the NPS score doubles during an IROP. It doubles. So this then ends up driving behavior. And we actually pull in it's not just the surveys we give them, because again, the NPS is the surveys. We also pull in the tweets. So this one happened to be a tweet. Great to be home. Flight 582 pilot was amazing with the landing. 200-foot cloud ceiling in dense fog. Awesome. Communicator 2. We give that tweet to the pilot, happened to be Captain Mike Strauss, and it reinforces to him that communicating is important. And so that's that behavior, because if you've hired the person who's intrinsically motivated, the thing that motivates them most is giving them the customer feedback. And that is the science for us at JetBlue as to why, after 16 years, we're still able to scale. It's through the analytics on the customer service, and it's getting the feedback to our crew members. So for us, if we've done this then, the awards are the outcome. So we aren't actually striving specifically, it's not the goal. It becomes the outcome. And these are the actual pictures, as I mentioned, traveling all over. This is in Colombia. I think that one is in San Juan. That one's Salt Lake, Washington, D.C. The idea, again, is to build the pride. So I have about 10 minutes left. Usually when I give this talk, people have a lot of different questions about the different dynamics or different. So I am open. I can answer any question you have, including, yes, racing airplanes or anything if you like. So, yes? Oh, sure, yes. Okay, how do we trace it? So what we did, and this is one of those big data things, right? So we know who the customer was, who filled out a survey, and we can track every survey that they do fill out, and we can track their behaviors. So we look at if somebody's answered, let's say, 5 surveys over the last 5 years, and we see where their purchase behavior is, and then we see when they have a bad flight, because we track when a customer, we know if their flight was delayed by more than an hour, or we know that there was a misconnect, or there was a significant issue with their flight, and where it drops and where it rises. So what we did is we literally did longitudinal analysis of the repurchases based upon their NPS score. There's a lot more pieces to that, but it was a 5-year longitudinal analysis comparing survey scores to purchases and the dollar amount that they spent. And it's particularly focusing on what happened when there was a bad flight versus a good flight. Does that answer your question? And it's millions of dollars. I mean, it's a very significant number, so it's definitely worth tracking. The challenge, and this is something especially here in the U.S., people are moving away from doing email surveys, and so thinking about how do you engage and get that same data through different mechanisms that people will do. So I think that's something that we're thinking about. Who takes an Uber and you get your little stars, but when you think about it, how many people don't give the 5 stars, right? So when you get a 1-star or a 2-star, it's up to you as the organization to track down why. Yes.
So first off, I just moved from Tampa, and JetBlue is obviously my favorite. Just moved from Tampa, and JetBlue is definitely my favorite airline. So I probably flew on some of your flights. But how much of the difference between JetBlue's customer experience and the legacy airlines would you attribute to the culture of the people, and how much of it is different business processes that we might not even see? And is this something that the legacy airlines could theoretically achieve just by changing the mindset of their people?
Ooh, probably the hardest thing in business, particularly if you're a large company, would be to change your culture. That would be, let's talk to you. It's run by Jews in United, right? So they're trying to change it.
Delta's done a good job.
And so, yeah. Now Delta has, and that's one of those interesting, because we do look at Delta where they were before to where they are now. They have, over the course of time, done a really nice job. I will say that, now this part I haven't done the exact scientific study, but because so much of it is intertwined, again, a good product, if you know that pride is one of the big drivers, if you have a really good product, it drives further engagement. So if you didn't have a good product, it would be less proud. So product does play a fairly important role. I mean, I would be crazy to say not. For us, we believe, and it's even in our public filings, that our culture is our number one differentiator. And it is because the culture piece is interwoven in so many different elements. Everything that we do, we put, yes, there's the business lens on it, right? There's the, what's the profit loss? What's the P&L impact of it? And yes, we tie it to the actual NPS score too. But we also look at it straight from just a straight cultural lens. Does this make sense? Does it fit to JetBlue? We're just starting a program where we can help our crew members complete their college degree for free. That, we don't know the direct impact of that, but we can assume the impact of it, and that is a decision that was made strictly because of the culture. So, yeah, the culture piece. Which is why I don't mind sharing all of this. I mean, in the end of the day, I'm really passionate. It would be great if honestly, the culture of customer service, this is the thing that's differentiating customers right now in this decade right now. Customer service is the thing that is differentiating the good companies from the bad companies. And so there's an enormous focus on it. I'm passionate about sharing the story. Okay, and I actually used to work at United, so I was there for 13 years. If United actually could adopt some of our stuff, I would be so happy. So but it's difficult. Yes. Yes, you have to have the box.
Hi. I'm Annette. I used to be a Virgin America gate agent at
Oh,
SFO,
great.
so solidarity there. But
And I will say the culture there, it was public knowledge, right? We tried to buy Virgin.
I wish you
The old man on the tail won out, but we think you have great culture, really good culture.
I used to work there, but
Okay.
now I'm at Airbnb. But
Okay.
So my big thing that I'm wondering about, if you have ideas about, if you have contracted call center employees and how you keep them engaged, because we're becoming at a point where 90% of our overall volume is at partners, and we do a lot of things to keep them engaged and keep their pride up. So I was just wondering what your
Yes.
answers are.
In fact, let me go back to this. Maybe I can go back to the previous slide. We actually have contractors too. I'm trying to get to the one with the J.D. Power Award tour, if I can get to it. There we are. These guys are business partners. These guys are business partners. We call them business partners, not vendors, right? So business partners. So we treat, to the extent possible, our business partners as crew members. They actually come through our orientation as well when possible. Sometimes they don't have visas to come into the U.S. and our orientation's in Orlando. So to the extent possible we do. Even for our recognition program, we're weaving it in so that we can give, because you can give spot like $25 award checks or whatever to people, weaving them into our fabric. So we want that because in the end of the day, to the customer, sure, from a business reason, it made sense to outsource the call center. Let's just say that it made sense. But the customer doesn't know that. To the customer, the call center is the company. So to the extent that you can treat that outsourced call center crew member to be a crew member or employee, it makes a difference. So we go way out of our way to do that, way out of our way. Yes. Yep.
What personality test do you use in your hiring process?
What person? I was hoping somebody would ask that. Big passion of mine, as I said. So when I became the head of talent for JetBlue, the very first thing I did is I went out to find a director of people analytics. PhD, as I mentioned, and then over the course of 4 years, we have more PhDs at JetBlue than any in our talent team than any other department. So we actually have created our selection assessments in-house. It is an expensive proposition to do, so it's not something that I recommend everyone to do. But we felt to make our culture as unique as it is, we wanted to really control and be able to change the assessment as we got additional feedback. We're able now, for example, we're in the process, and it was also out there in the media, is we're creating a pilot training program. There's a pilot shortage coming. A lot of airlines now are parking airplanes because they don't have pilots. So we are now we've created a selection assessment and a selection process to hire pilots before they're pilots. And we put them through a 4-year training program. So, but you can only, how do you hire pilots who aren't pilots yet? It's all through the selection assessment process. So, but there are a lot of really good, this is, again, using, now, especially for those who are here in Silicon Valley, there are so much movement in this area because customer service is driven by the culture of the company, and the culture of the company is driven by who you hire. So this is a big business proposition for people to think about how do you, especially in the call center when you have a lot of volume. If you want to, but here's the business case. You get a selection assessment that will reduce your attrition. Your customer service scores go up, your attrition goes down if you can find the right culture match. But good question. I think I have time for about 2 more questions. Yes?
As a follow-up to that, you mentioned volunteerism as a good
Yes.
Are there any other indicators or good questions that assess motivation?
Yeah, so the question was volunteerism is a good measure. So yes, and we actually have that also we've checked, because even when somebody comes to JetBlue, we have a program where you can volunteer, and if you volunteer for 25 hours, you get a free ticket to give to your charity. So we can track volunteer hours at JetBlue, and we know that crew members who volunteer more or at JetBlue as part of in the community are also more engaged. So that we have the volunteerism part is proven. And so the question was, what other factors do we look for? It's passion. And actually, passion is one of our values. But what do I mean by passion? And I think one of the previous speakers mentioned this. We want to know that the person wants the job that we're hiring them for. They want to be a customer service professional. So we ask them, one of the favorite questions is, what was your favorite class in high school? Or what was your favorite class in college if they went to college? So we want to understand what makes them tick. And then you see when their eyes light up. You know, if their favorite class was something that was maybe not as people related, maybe then we might dig in a little bit more, but if their favorite class was acting, or was drama or singing or chorus or art or public speaking, although who really says that? If it's a little on the other side, if on a customer service professional, we might dig into other side on one of those that are more analytically related. Now, if they're applying for a position that is analytically related, we want that. We want somebody who loves to do math all the time on my analytics team. That makes sense? Yes?
You put a slide up there that you didn't talk about, and now I'm really curious. It said that it had prioritization with
Yeah.
arrow to executive leadership.
Yes.
And then accountability to department leaders and behavior to frontline.
Yes.
So my question is, with such a big company such as JetBlue, with your executive leadership so far removed from the you mitigate the risk of executive leadership making prioritization decisions that aren't maybe in line with what's actually happening with your service and what your customers need or want, because they're not talking to the customers.
All right, so really good question. So the question was, okay, so the data says that this should be a priority, whatever it is, X. And you have X, Y, and Z, and you can only do 2 of them, 2 out of 3. And so the numbers say it should be X and Y. So your question is, well, how do you really know? What if the crew member is saying it's Y and Z? This is one of those reasons why we require our leaders to be out in the field, in the breaks room. So I'm having pizza with the baggage handlers in LaGuardia to really understand what their challenges are. And then we have quarterly meetings with the leadership of our different work groups. So we call them values committees because values are so important at JetBlue. So we have the crew members elect representatives. Like there's a representative from Tampa, there's a representative from Rochester, there's all different representatives for the airport people, and the flight attendants have representatives, and they have quarterly meetings with senior leadership. And yes, sometimes the crew members, and let's face it, some of them are making, $10, $12 an hour. And the most important thing in the world is they really want the Coke machine changed to a Pepsi machine. And they're telling the CEO that. But you know what? The CEO then goes and changes it. It's pretty amazing. But sometimes, though, what they do is the senior leaders will say, hey, here's the things that we're going to do next year. And what do you think about it? For example, I'm running JetBlue Ventures right now. Our crew members are very curious about it because they want to make sure that JetBlue's not wasting money in startups and expanding when we shouldn't. And so it was literally this morning, I was asked, could I come out to the Values Committee Summit next month, and there'll be 200 crew members from all the different work groups, and I'm going to do a TED Talk on JetBlue Ventures to share with them what it's all about so that they know. And then I'll get feedback from them. What are some areas? Because one of the things that our head of customer service said to me was, yes, we want to get into doing more messaging and AI bots and all these various things. We still want the human element. But she said, what I really want to do is find more tools, startups that are creating tools for our agents. And so this will be one of those things where I'll talk to the crew members about. So we have breakout sessions. So it's listening to them because you know what? They're the ones that have the biggest pain points. So it could help drive where I might invest.
But it is realistic.
Yes.
That's helpful. Thanks.
All right. I think that I'm going to leave it over here. I think we're running out. I know there's a few other questions, but I can stick around for the break if necessary. Do we have time to run for 1 or 2 more questions? All right. One question. Well, we have a winner back here. One question.
I'll try and talk about it. What are some other ways, I like what you're saying about, the leadership talks, the lowest rungs, but amongst the different rungs, how do you help to create unity and the same culture when someone makes $10 an hour and someone makes $30 an hour and they know that? That's a particular challenge.
Well, this is where, again, I'm going to get into the talent side of it. It's so important to align incentives for the leadership. It is what gets measured matters, and they will track it. So while the crew members are, we're talking with them about it, why does the leader spend out? And all the different leaders go, you know what, because the CEO is going to go spend time in San Jose. Well, you know what, the manager of San Jose is going to be there when that happens, and the supervisor. So there's a lot. It just sends the signal that being in the presence out there, and it's in people's goals. So what is in leadership's goals from the very top on down. So with that, I think I should wrap. Thank you very much, everybody.